Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface of an ordinary evening. Outside, the last trace of sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and golden, touching the edges of the furniture as if it wanted to linger. I sat on the couch with a book resting loosely in my lap, but I wasn't reading. My thoughts drifted, half caught between the day that had just ended and the unspoken anticipation of what the night might bring. Then, almost startling in its simplicity, he said it, "I've been thinking about you all day." The words felt heavier than the air, carrying a sincerity that stilled my breath. My husband stood across the room, his expression calm but searching, as though he was waiting for me to understand something beyond what he'd spoken. His tie was loosened, his shoulders relaxed, but his eyes held that kind of intensity that speaks without needing to. For a moment, I didn't answer. I just let the silence hold us both, the weight of his confession settling into me like warmth seeping into cold skin. He walked closer, his steps unhurried, every movement deliberate, like he was giving me time to feel the truth of what he'd just admitted. The space between us shrank, and with it, my heartbeat seemed to grow louder. I couldn't decide if it was the way he looked at me, as though I was both familiar and endlessly new, or if it was the way his presence filled the room, making it impossible to escape the gravity of this moment. There was no guilt in his words, no hesitation. Just desire spoken with the honesty of someone who has nothing to hide. And yet, in that honesty, I felt a vulnerable pull, because when someone loves you this openly, you're reminded of the fragile, beautiful risk of being loved at all. I wanted to lean into it, to meet his need with my own, but there was also a part of me that trembled with the intensity of being so deeply wanted. The clock ticked softly on the wall, marking seconds that stretched longer than they should. His hand reached out, fingers brushing mine, not rushing, just a simple touch. The kind of touch that carries 1,000 unspoken promises. My breath caught, the book slipping from my lap onto the floor, forgotten. And then, before I could answer him, before I could even find the words to match the storm inside me, he whispered again, this time lower, almost pleading, "Tonight, I want all of you." But would I let myself surrender to that? Or would fear of being seen so completely hold me back? His words lingered in the air, fragile yet unshakable, like a candle flame swaying but never going out. Tonight, I want all of you. It wasn't just the kind of desire that fades by morning, it was something deeper, a plea wrapped in certainty. I looked at him, really looked, and saw more than just my husband standing there. I saw the man who had carried the weight of long days, who had faced the world and still come home to me with something tender left to give. My chest tightened. Because as much as I longed to melt into that warmth, a quiet fear tugged at me. What if he loved me more than I knew how to be loved? What if the vulnerability he asked for required me to be braver than I was ready to be? My fingers lingered in his, hesitant, testing the silence between us like someone testing the depth of water before stepping in. His thumb brushed my hand, gentle, unhurried. "You don't have to hide from me," he murmured. The way he said it wasn't commanding, but it carried a truth that felt impossible to ignore. He wasn't asking for perfection, or for me to become someone I wasn't. He wanted me, the flawed, uncertain, quietly yearning version of me. And that was both the comfort and the danger. Memories flashed through me, almost unbidden. The early days of us, messy apartments, late-night laughter, arguments that ended with tearful embraces. The first time he reached for my hand when he didn't know if I'd reach back. The night he promised that no matter how much life tested us, we'd never stop choosing each other. And now here we were, years later, standing on another fragile edge, different, older, but still tethered by something unspoken and unbreakable. He leaned closer, close enough for me to catch the faint trace of his cologne mixed with the quiet exhaustion of his day. "I've been holding it in," he admitted softly. "All day, it's been you. In my thoughts, in my breath, in every empty space between meetings and noise. And now I can't." He stopped himself, biting down on the words, as though afraid of overwhelming me. My heart pounded, torn between leaning forward and stepping back. His need was raw, real, but so was my hesitation. The room seemed to shrink, the world folding until it was just us, our breaths, our silence, our unspoken fears. And still, that question loomed: would I let myself fall, or would I resist the gravity of his love tonight? I wanted to answer him, to let his certainty wash away the doubts that curled inside me, but my voice refused to rise. Instead, silence spoke for me, and in that silence came the memories I hadn't invited, memories of a younger me, standing in front of someone who promised love but gave me distance instead. Back then, affection had felt conditional, like something I had to earn. And even though years had passed, even though my husband had never once made me feel undeserving, some old shadow lingered. He must have sensed it, the hesitation I couldn't disguise. His hand tightened around mine, not to trap me, but to anchor me. "You don't have to be afraid," he whispered. "Not with me." His eyes softened, but behind them I caught something too, an ache of his own. It struck me then, maybe he was fighting his own battles. Maybe the long hours at work, the quiet sighs he thought I didn't hear at night, had left him just as fragile, just as in need of reassurance. And there it was, the heart of our conflict. He wanted to give himself fully tonight, but part of me feared I'd break under the weight of being truly seen. He longed to erase the day's distance, while I stood between craving closeness and fearing what it demanded of me. Love, even in marriage, is never simple. It asks again and again, will you choose me, even when it's easier to hide? The clock ticked again, steady and unrelenting. I thought of the vows we had exchanged, the years we had built together. Not just the bright days, but the nights we argued, the mornings we made up, the quiet compromises that never made it into photographs but stitched us together more firmly than passion ever could. He had never turned away, even when I was difficult to love. And maybe that was why his need tonight felt so raw. It wasn't only desire. It was the ache of a man who wanted to know he was still chosen. I looked at him, at the exhaustion hidden under his devotion, at the way his shoulders slumped slightly as though carrying a weight I had never asked about. What had his day taken from him that he now sought in me? Was this about passion, or was this about needing to feel alive again through the person he trusted most? The question lodged in my chest, thick and heavy. If I let go of fear tonight, I wouldn't just be giving him love, I'd be giving him my whole truth. Was I ready for that? His eyes held mine so intently that I felt stripped of every defense I had carefully built over the years. He wasn't just looking at me, he was searching me, peeling back the quiet walls I didn't even know I had raised. I wanted to look away, to give myself the illusion of safety, but my gaze refused to break from his. And in that wordless exchange, I felt the danger of being known too well. He stepped closer, and the space between us dissolved into something fragile and trembling. The brush of his hand along my arm was almost nothing, but it carried the weight of a storm. My skin burned where his fingers lingered, and with it came the ache of every moment I had withheld, every time I had chosen silence when he had asked for closeness. Tonight, there was no hiding. Inside me, two voices wrestled. One whispered surrender, reminding me that love was not meant to be rationed, that this man had proven himself 1,000 times over. The other voice clung to old scars, warning that letting go meant risking everything: rejection, disappointment, the possibility that love could one day fade. My heart pounded like a drum caught between hope and fear, and he seemed to hear it in the quiet rise and fall of my breath. "Talk to me," he said softly, though his voice cracked at the edges. It wasn't a demand, it was a plea. And that nearly broke me. Because it wasn't just desire in his tone, it was the trembling need of a man asking not to be shut out. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled on my tongue. Instead, I found myself leaning closer, drawn by the magnetism of his warmth, by the steadiness of his presence. His forehead touched mine, and in that small gesture, the world seemed to collapse into something unbearably intimate. His breath mingled with mine, steady, patient, waiting. The silence grew heavy, alive with everything we hadn't said. I wanted to confess it all, the fear, the longing, the desperate need to believe love could be this safe. But as his hand slipped gently to the curve of my back, anchoring me to him, I realized I stood at the edge of a choice that could change everything. Would I step into him fully, or would I let the fear of my own vulnerability hold us both suspended in this aching, unfinished moment? His forehead rested against mine, his breath steady but his silence louder than any words. For a moment, it felt like the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to decide. Then, just as I thought I might finally let go of the fear clinging to me, he whispered something that shook me more deeply than his earlier plea. "I don't just want you tonight," he said, his voice low, breaking at the edges. "I'm afraid I've been losing you." The words cut sharper than I expected. My chest tightened, a rush of heat rising to my face. Losing me? The thought pierced through the tender fog of desire and brought everything into stark focus. Had my hesitations, the silences, the distractions, the way I sometimes turned away when I didn't mean to, planted that fear in him? The idea that my love hadn't been loud enough, strong enough, terrified me. I pulled back slightly, searching his face, and what I found there was not accusation but vulnerability. His eyes were glassy, holding both devotion and quiet panic. This was the man who had carried me through my darkest days, who had chosen me without hesitation, and now he was the one standing on unsteady ground, unsure if I still stood firmly with him. A storm of guilt and tenderness surged within me. I wanted to throw my arms around him, to erase the doubt he had voiced. But part of me still trembled, because what if he was right? Had I let the comfort of years together dull the urgency of our love? Had I let old scars keep me half close to him, even as he kept reaching for all of me? "I'm here," I whispered, but the words felt too small, too fragile against the depth of his fear. His hand slipped from my back, his fingers grazing mine as though testing whether I would hold on. And I did, but he searched my grip with an intensity that made it clear, he needed more than touch tonight. He needed truth. The tension grew unbearable, a delicate thread stretched to its breaking point. His need, my fear, the weight of unspoken history between us, it all converged here, in this fragile moment where one step closer could heal us, or break us further apart. And just when I thought I might finally speak the words he longed for, the sound of the clock striking the hour shattered the silence, echoing through the room like a reminder, time was running out. The clock's chime faded, but its echo lingered, like a reminder that we could not stay suspended forever. His eyes searched mine, and in them I saw the ache of a man who had carried his love too long in silence, fearing it might not be enough. And in me, I felt the weight of years spent guarding myself, never realizing how much my quiet distance had cost him. Something inside me broke, not in despair, but in surrender. My hand tightened around his, and before fear could rise again, I spoke the words I had always hidden in my chest. "You haven't been losing me," I whispered, voice trembling, "but I've been afraid of giving you everything, because what if it was still not enough?" His breath caught, and the faintest, almost broken smile flickered across his lips. "Enough?" His voice cracked. "You are everything. I don't need perfect. I just need you." Tears welled before I could stop them, hot and unashamed. For the first time in years, I let him see all of me, fear, love, doubt, hope, all the fragile pieces I had kept hidden. And instead of turning away, he held them as though they were precious. His arms wrapped around me, not possessive, but steady, anchoring me to the truth that I had always been chosen, even in my silence. The tension that had gripped the room melted, replaced by something softer, deeper. It wasn't desire alone that filled the air now, it was renewal. The kind of closeness that feels like both falling and finally being caught. His lips brushed my temple, not as conquest, but as promise, and I realized the only thing standing between us all along had been my fear of being fully seen. And then, just as I began to breathe freely in the warmth of his embrace, he whispered the final truth I hadn't expected. "I think about us every day," he said, his voice low but steady. Because you are the reason I make it through the weight of everything else. You're not just my wife, you're my home. The words undid me. Because home was not a place I had ever trusted fully before. But in his arms, with his truth spilling like light into every shadow, I finally believed. And that belief was the climax we had both been waiting for, the moment where fear gave way to love's quiet, unshakable certainty. The night didn't end with fireworks or grand gestures, it ended with stillness. The kind of stillness that feels sacred, like the world outside has stopped spinning just so two people can remember how to breathe together. We stayed in each other's arms long after the tension had unraveled, letting silence do what words never fully could. His heartbeat pressed against my ear, steady, grounding, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the safety of belonging without conditions. Later, we found ourselves sitting side by side on the couch, the forgotten book at our feet, the lamp casting its golden glow across our faces. He reached for my hand again, but this time it wasn't to pull me closer, it was simply to hold me, to remind me of the simple, unspoken truth between us. There was no urgency left, only a deep, quiet certainty. I thought I had to fight for you, he admitted softly, eyes lowered as though confessing a secret. But maybe I just had to wait for you to trust me with all of you. His honesty struck me harder than any plea for affection ever could. I turned to him, threading my fingers through his. And I thought love meant always being strong, always keeping some part of myself hidden. But tonight, I realized it's the opposite. Love is being seen in all my weakness, and still being chosen. We sat with that truth, letting it sink into the room like a final note of music fading into silence. And though no external battle had been fought, I knew something had shifted. The quiet war I waged against my own vulnerability was finally ending. He hadn't asked me to be flawless, only to be real. As the hours slipped past, we spoke softly about little things, the day he'd had, the way I'd been drifting in thought lately, the small rituals of our life that we so often overlooked. And in those ordinary details, I felt the extraordinary, love that doesn't always roar, but sometimes whispers until you finally learn to listen. When we finally rose to turn off the lights, I caught his hand again, holding it tightly. He looked back at me with that gentle intensity one had first fallen for, and in his gaze I saw not just the man I married, but the man who had waited for me to trust him with the deepest parts of myself. That night didn't end with fear. It ended with belief in us, in the strength we carried not from perfection but from honesty. And as I lay beside him, my head resting where it belonged, I knew that nothing outside these walls could take away what had been rebuilt tonight. Because love, at its truest, is not found in the moments we guard ourselves, but in the moments we dare to be seen. And in his arms, I was finally seen.